Welcome to Grief and Gratitude Podcast. We're your hosts, Mandy and Crystal.
This is a space for honest conversations about loss, healing, and everything in between. Each week, we share stories, perspectives, and moments that remind us that even in the hardest seasons, gratitude can still exist. Thank you for sharing space with us. We're really glad you're here.
Hi, this is Crystal and Mandy from the Grief and Gratitude Podcast. We are here today to launch our 8th episode with Erin Clark. We were fortunate enough to meet Erin Clark through social media. Erin Clark is the founder of How's the Weather? How's the Weather being a simpler, gentler way to really ask others how they are doing and in times of grief. So thank you, Erin, for being here with us. And we'll let you tell your story.
Hi, Erin. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, girls, so much for having me today and letting me tell my story. How's the Weather was created out of my own grief. 4 years ago, I lost my husband unexpectedly, and people, my friends, my family, my neighbors, my colleagues would ask out of the kindness of their heart, as we do, how are you? How are you doing? And because I was in such darkness in my grief, I did not have an answer for that simple question. So I thought about it. I thought about the answer, and all I could come up with is, could you ask me how the weather is? Meaning, when it's raining, I could simply give that message of one word, it's raining. I've been crying a lot. And that would help the receiver, right? You have so many wonderful people that come into your life that want to know what they can do. And when we are asked, how are you? It's typically we're fine for many reasons, but fine ends the conversation. And how's the weather has opened the conversation and really has started a new language. So I mentioned rainy, but we could also say stormy. That's a little heavier. Maybe you just know by hearing that one word that you might have to go sit with that person. It might be a heavier day. And I experienced many stormy days in the years that my husband passed. And I was talking to a friend of mine. Her name is Shauna. She actually helps me with How's the Weather. And she's my friend and my neighbor. And she came home one day knowing my story of How's the Weather. And she had a patient. She works in a hygienist's office. And she shared this story with the patient because the patient opened up and started a conversation with her. And that was, she lost her husband a year before. She was then being asked the same question that I think we all are. And that is, how are you? And she was really upset because she didn't have the answers. So Shauna shared with her, how about you start using what my friend Erin said? How's the weather? And she started to cry and really felt that warmness of how's the weather and that she had a choice. And when I heard this story, I thought, boy, I have been using that in the last 4 years to comfort me and comfort my friends and family and my kids. And that one person felt the impact of how's the weather and that they were going to then use it in their community. And I thought to myself, I need this to be heard. So I started a company called How's the Weather. I've never been a business owner. I learned to get a website. I sell hats and sweatshirts and candles and stickers because I thought, yes, I want to get this message out, but how could it be? How could we wear it? How could we share it? How could we live it? So that's how How's the Weather got started. My husband passed away, like I said, 4 years ago. And each year I would write how my grief year went. And this year was his 4th year on 10/2. And instead of writing the letter of how my grief year went, I started How's the Weather. And it's been super successful. Humbly, I say that with such gratitude. Like I mentioned, I have a website. I'm on social medias. And through my website, in just believe this is going on our 23 week, since we've launched How's the Weather, and it is in 3 countries and 23 or 24 states, which means to me that How's the Weather was supposed to be started. That in those states and in those countries, people reached out and saw me on my website. My story is on my website, and maybe they just bought a sticker or a hat, but they're having this conversation, and I call it a new language. Sort of like we learn Spanish, or, my kids took different languages in high school, and there's sign language, and this has become a new language, and many have called it a movement, and I've accepted that. And, by the grace of God, I listened through my grief, and God said it was time to do this. And I've heard many, many stories about how other people are going through grief, and that How's the Weather has really been a big part of their new conversations with people. Sometimes I think when we go through grief, whether you have lost somebody, or whether you've lost a job, or maybe you're going through a divorce, we need groups, we need people, but we just don't know where to start because the grief is heavy. We often think we're the only ones that are walking through that. And we're not. But one of the other things is if we share our story, which we often do with our best friends or our neighbor, our colleagues, we're putting our story on that person that wants to be there for us. And sometimes they don't know what to do with that information that they are given. And How's the Weather supports both sides, right? It gives the griever, again, whatever that grief is to that person, it gives them a new language. And it also gives the receiver support. What do I do? Sometimes I think we come from a place of just wanting to fix everything, and that's okay. That's what we're here for. But sometimes grief doesn't need fixing. It just needs a companion. But how does a companion show up? Sometimes that companion needs rules and steps. And what do I do? And How's the Weather has been only a language, not only a movement, but sort of, if I will, like an instruction for one another. Like, what do I do with that information? Sometimes we just sit, because that's the most important thing I have found from my grief. At times, I want to talk about it, but then there are many times that I just don't know how. So if you have somebody who knows, just to come in and sit, not to fix it, not to give suggestion, just to sit, put on some pajamas, put on a movie, just sit. So I have been blessed. And, another blessing is being asked to be on your podcast today to share my story. So I thank you so much.
Absolutely. I think what you're describing is even a parameter, right? You can put around you and another, the person on the receiving end, or the person seeing you in grief. I think anyone who's experienced it, you can have a family member, a friend, right? A stranger, you bring it up, it's too big, right? What do I do with that? But where I could describe, it's really windy, right? It's really stormy today. It's still, right? It's peaceful out. To be able to use those words are universal. And so you've provided that space. If I may, I wanted to ask, just to go back some to your loss and before How's the Weather, right? Because you didn't know How's the Weather, that idea didn't even exist before loss. If you could share some about your life before and your husband, right? Give some kind of breath to him here in that space for us to understand him more.
Yes, thank you for that. You're right. I've often talked about the before Erin and the after Erin. Yeah. So Greg Clark, which I often refer to his first and last name, this has been something I've always called to him. I'm going to turn 60 in April, and we have been together since I was 19. We were 33 years before he passed away. We have 2 children, Madison and Chandler, who are adults. And my oldest, Madison, is 33 and Chandler is 29. And I think the way to describe us is we had a simple, very, very tight family. We raised the kids in church. My kids played sports and what have you. I had a part-time job and I retired out of the school district. Greg was a sheriff for many years, retired and went into, of all things, family therapy in the end of his life. And we raised our kids here where I live out in California. And, I think that we had a simple, busy, lovely, beautiful life. And I was raised with 11 brothers and sisters, a big Irish Catholic family. And I have always been, I'm the youngest girl. I've always been kind of, strong in my faith, but also strong in my kind of personality and could sort of get through anything. And that was a good thing. I had also had a lot of loss, including my parents and my siblings. And, I always leaned very heavily on my faith. And like I had mentioned, Greg and I raised our kids in the church. And so my faith was very strong when I was married to Greg. And when we lost Greg, that was shaken. I didn't give up on God. I wasn't angry, but boy, I was really shaken to my knees. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't that strong person anymore. And I didn't know what to do with that because I was so used to being a fairly strong mom, a very strong wife. And we all go through things in life, whether it's, moving to a new city, which we did, and, having different jobs, which we went through, having different age challenges with kids where they're, 2 and 3 year olds are in high school. Those are all changes as parents that you go through. And I kind of always prided myself of getting through things. And when Greg passed away, I didn't even know where to begin. I honestly thought my heart was so broken that I was going to be one of those that didn't make it through it. I'd always heard that. Oh gosh, especially for older people, that if their spouse died, then unfortunately, wasn't soon after that they would go of a broken heart. I certainly had a broken heart and I didn't know that I was going to get through it. But by the grace of God, I did. Each day was a challenge, and each day you can't imagine it, but your heart is getting weaker and not stronger. So hopefully that's a little before and after. And, I think that the main thing about how's the weather and how it could go to the before and after of anyone out there going through their grief is that you will survive, even though you don't think you will. And when you have podcasts that care about you and bring this language of gratitude and grief like you girls are doing, it's a beautiful thing, because when you're grieving and think you were strong and maybe don't have that strength anymore, you can reach out to share your story. And I was married to a very, very private person, which in return made me private. I wasn't used to that. I came from 11 brothers and sisters. We told each other and knew each step we took, we knew, which is lovely and full of love. But he was private, and, I learned to stay private. But what I always knew is that sharing really does get you out of I'm feeling alone.
I think this is really great, especially for kids, because especially my daughter, I'm thinking they are find it hard to explain how they feel when their brother died a year and a half ago. It's exactly what you said. People would say, "How are you?" "Okay, I'm okay." And I think it's
too big, such a big question, right? For anyone to answer, but
right.
for
a child
to
how's
answer.
the weather
Yeah.
is a wonderful way to say it's stormy, it's sunny. So I think that's really wonderful.
Thank you so much. Speaking of children, I had So I retired from the school districts. I mentioned that earlier. And I had a teacher reach out to me, and that I've known for a very long time. She's taught at the elementary school that my kids went to. And she said, I just want you to know that I'm a first grade teacher. And I start the day with how's the weather with these kiddos. And some of them share that, it's sunny because they made it to school on time. Some of them share it's stormy because, like you just mentioned, maybe they've lost a father or a mother or a sibling, and they're able to have that word. And I was so overwhelmed. I hadn't talked to her in probably 10 years. And she just saw my post and took it upon herself to bring that into the classroom. I thought it was so beautiful that these kiddos who have had loss could use this. Even if they drew it and drew a rainbow or drew, meaning, and they could just put one sentence to it. It's overwhelming, really, especially kids. I think we are all kids at heart, right? Whether we're 80 or, 8, it's too big for everybody, especially if it's your first time and you just don't know. And so hopefully this helps those kids, because really, if we start to teach that generation that it's okay to talk, it's okay to have big feelings. But if we start to teach them a different way of answering, oh my gosh, immeasurable, right? Someone said, where do you want this to be? And I was like, worldwide. Let's start with the kids. They really are the next generation. And then their kids, like, let's get them talking and keep them talking. And then your little one could share one day, like, man, I didn't have a word for this, but my mom and her friend had a podcast, or we read somewhere that, how's the weather is helping others. That conversation and connection and community can just be a little different. And that's where it starts.
When thinking of grief and gratitude and your journey, was it the 4th anniversary that How's the Weather began? You said it was 4 years in. I'm wondering if you can think back to just your journey getting there, right? Because it came the 4th year.
Mhm.
How much did it change and shift? Like, do you remember that first year in anniversary, when just explaining your grief and gratitude in that journey and how you made it to year 4?
Yes, I do remember every step.
Mm.
For a long time, I didn't remember a lot, right? From the day it happened to his service, you sort of black out and you get through, it's almost like I talked about earlier, like a storm, right? When this happened, I felt like I had been thrown off a boat, a ship really, into the storm in that storm, it was like the waves just kept coming and coming, and I was drowning basically. So I do remember each year, and I write in my journal very similar to that. So I'll just kind of go back to year 1. I wrote, feeling like I've been thrown off a ship. The waves kept coming. I was drowning every day, not even getting the chance to have, a breath. And once in a while, I'd see a life jacket, meaning everybody in my life. I've been very fortunate that I have a big family. I have wonderful neighbors. I have better friends. Those are my life jackets.
Mm.
And they were doing everything they could to save me and to be there for me. And so I would write, those life jackets were coming, and of no fault of those life jacket throwers, if you will, but they had little tiny holes in it. So I'd come up for maybe a breath to reach for that life jacket, and then there was just not enough oxygen for me to survive. And I felt like that each year. I always say for me, the first year was kind of all business, meaning you have to figure it out all on your own, whatever that business means to you. Is your household okay? You're the only one running it now, right? You had a partner in that. So the first year was very business, and I'd write my sticky note every day. It had 3 things on it. It said, get up, take a shower, and move. So that was my first year in trying to breathe and make it through the storm. The second year seemed to me and felt even to this day like the worst one. Like when there truly is a storm in life, when it's raining, you think, oh, well, there's a 7-day forecast of rain, and that's, we're going to see clear skies. I did not mentally see a clear sky whatsoever in the second year. And I just had such a hard time believing that that storm could be so much more rougher that second year. I thought, well, there's just, you couldn't even see the land if you were a boater and could understand it from this point of view. And then the third year I wrote, I never thought I'd survive this storm. I never thought that those life jackets would ever be thrown and be filled with air. And I never thought that I would see, the sand and land again. I don't know why I always referred to my grief as a storm and to weather. And maybe that's just part of God's plan. And he knew that I was going to start How's the Weather? Of course he did, because he's already written our book. To continue on the third year, even now when I tell it, I take a big sigh because I think that was the year going into the third, fourth year, all those life jackets felt like they were filled up, and that one actually reached my body and reached around my neck, and that it really brought me to shore. Was I better? Was I healed? Was my broken heart mended? No, I don't. What I've understood through grief, and then, again, I'm only 4 years in, is that it will always be with you, and you are always going to be different. But that third year, I made it to land, and I thought, okay, I got out of that storm. And more importantly, that the sunny days felt warm when I had them before, because there were sunny days literally in the forecast, 1 through 3 year, but I didn't feel any of that warmth. I just felt dark and heavy and wet at times, if I may say it that way, from tears. And so the third year, and going into the fourth, I thought, okay, you can survive. And when it was time for the fourth year, and I was told that story by my friend Shauna about how she shared How's the Weather with her patient, I thought, oh my gosh, it really felt like such a bright, sunny kind of weather moment, if you will, right? I talked about forecast earlier. It's almost like the weatherman said, like, the forecast is clear. This is what I want you to do with it. And, that's how How's the Weather got started. And, just like the weather outside, as I mentioned, that it doesn't rain forever. The sun will come out. And I think that's a pretty powerful message wherever you live, because weather has a huge effect on our mental health. And How's the Weather is about supporting mental health wherever you come from, whatever your weather is, and whatever your grief story is.
You mentioned that this was God's plan for you. Has your faith changed? Has it gotten stronger? Is it any different than it was before?
Yes, thank you for that question, because it has changed. I had always turned to God for everything. And I always felt like during those times of turning to him, whether I lost my best friend when I was 16. It was a terrible accident. Everybody around me, rightfully so, was very angry. I remember specifically to this day, like, not being angry with him and just saying, I guess you needed her more than we did. And then fast forward, I lost my mom, and that was painful. And I relied on the Lord to, be there when I was crumbling during that grief, and so on. I have many stories, unfortunately, and I know other people. I realized that year of losing my mom that other people had stories, but I was strong in my faith, and it didn't mean my grief was easy. It just meant that I felt the Lord and my in every good, bad, or indifferent part of my life, specifically stronger in all areas. Great things in my life, I've felt him. And when I lost Greg Clark, I remember thinking instantly, well, if heaven is so beautiful, because we all learn about it if we are believers. I remember thinking, I wonder why we didn't both go. Why didn't you take me and my children? And not in a suicidal thought, just like, well, it's so wonderful. How come you didn't take us? And then I remember thinking, I remember having a conversation with the Lord and saying, I know that you are powerful and you are my strength, but I think I'm going to do this on my own for a little bit. And I had my husband passed away in his sleep, and it was the first night since we had been together and married that I fallen asleep in another room. And so I essentially woke up and he had passed away. And it's very hard for me to say because I don't have guilt or regrets or anything like that. But I was very hard on myself. And I had a very hard time thinking, I wonder if he called out my name. I wonder if, I could have saved him. I gave him CPR, called 911, and I wasn't able to save him. So I had a really hard time with the Lord, if that makes sense. Why didn't you help me through that? You helped me with everything else. And I wasn't angry at God, which I was always really grateful for that, but I did lose my faith. And I remember walking away for a little bit from the Lord and thinking, not only was I so devastated in my own grief, but I was also so lost without him. And I remember one day specifically being on the beach because that's where I go to kind of walk through my grief and just get my mental state in a better place on days that it is feeling stormy and rainy. And I remember specifically having a conversation with the Lord that day and sort of just apologizing for trying to do this on my own. So my faith was shaken, but I think that was because of me. And I'm definitely back where I was before with the Lord. And I couldn't do it without him. So I'm grateful that I came to my senses and let him back in.
Hearing you share, I know, we talked a bit about our stories before, but it was similar for me when I had lost my twin and I was actually with her and woke and all the things, right? And the 911 and the CPR and everything. Questions question God, right? And it resonates with me when you say you stepped away, you stepped apart, and at the same time you came back around, right? Where God gives us that free will and that choice, which can also strengthen our faith.
Wow. Free will is something I talk about a lot with the Lord. If you will, I'll have conversations like, thank you so much for this great thing called our mind that you gave us. And thank you for prayer, because when your mind and your thoughts get a little off track, which mine do a lot in grief, and some of those decisions that you want to make in grief are free will. Not the best decisions, but he does give us free will. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. And, I also know that if we talk to him first, if we remember that, sometimes you can't. Blinded by grief, you're devastated by grief, in my case, you just forget to turn to him first, and you turn to yourself and your feelings, and those aren't sometimes they're not the thing that you should turn to. So I'm glad I have faith, and I'm glad that I have a relationship with the Lord and that he has given me grace on the times that I've walked away.
Grace you speak of that a lot too, right? To do things with intention. And also we are given grace and to be provided grace. Because maybe it feels like stepping away, and at the same time, right, it's the forgetting the story, right? But the footsteps in the sand, right? Where there is one set, like maybe you stepped away, but God was still there, right? Always.
Yeah, always. I remember that conversation on the beach. I remember having such a hard time with not being able to give Greg breath and just really. And I remember trying to share that one time with somebody, and they said, well, that's not your fault. And yes, that's a great thing to hear, and it is true, but that doesn't take away what you're feeling. And so I remember being on the beach, and God showed me what breath is all about and who gives it to who. And he showed me the palm trees and the wind moving those trees, and he showed me the waves coming in and out and the sand kind of just tossing through the air. And what he told me in that moment was, I am the one that gives you breath. I am the one that takes it. So let that heaviness, let it, give it to me, because I'm in charge of those things. I've already written your story. You were there, and, it's not your fault. So that was grace that I was given.
Do you feel that, well, Greg, when you speak of him, do you reference him as your husband? I know you mentioned sometimes you say first and last name. Do you still reference him as your husband?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Do you feel that he's still part of your story? Like, have you received signs from him? Do you believe where is he now in your story?
Great question. I do believe he's part of this story, and he is everywhere. One of the things that my kids and I and many other people in our family, not my nieces and nephews, we read one day that if you see dimes, that is a sign from your loved one that you lost. And I didn't want to read this book that I was given. The name of it is Signs. But I did one day. It's very short. And I read that, and I thought, oh, I feverishly was looking, Greg was in my dreams, and he came to dreams for my kids. And I've talked to him many times, and he's all around. I've dreamt about him like the first week he was gone, and he's in my dreams, and I hear his voice, and he's in songs that we had together through the years. And really, he's in my writing. He wrote a lot. That was really one of the big things. When I met Greg, he was in the Air Force. And so we had a long distance relationship. And so we wrote letters a lot. So he's in my writing. But the dimes seem to be a big significance of where he is and when he shows up. And gosh, I feel like that is another podcast of the many times that a dime has showed up. But I hear his voice, and I do refer to him as my husband still, and always will. And I love that. I will celebrate him. And in fact, yesterday I was talking to one of my nephews, and I said, when you're old and gray, he's in his 30s, but I said, I hope that I'm not, that aunt that talks about dead people all the time. And he said, no, I love this. You're my favorite aunt because you're open, and you talk about mental health, and, you give us permission to talk about our feelings.
I want to give you a chance now just to tell our listeners, for those who want to know more about you and about how's the weather, where do we find you? Is it as simple as just Googling how's the weather, or what's your website? How do we learn more about this language that you are teaching others?
Yeah, thank you. So I do have a website. It's www.howstheweather.com. I'm also on socials. So I have an Instagram, a TikTok, a YouTube page, and Facebook. And I will give you all the information I'd love for you to share with your community. I don't want to be off on like a .com, or I'm always one letter off. But yeah, How's the Weather is on my website. We have sweatshirts, trucker hats, beanies. I've just collabed with a wonderful candle company, and we have stickers, and you can learn more about my story on our website. And yes, I would love for your listening audience, your community, your friends and family to learn more about How's the Weather and the movement that it is becoming.
Great. Well, I think that's about all we have. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much. And go ahead. Any last words that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, first, I want to say thank you so much for letting me share my story, and for letting me get to know you girls and your story a little bit more. I think it's wonderful that we have communities and connections like this. And for your listening audience, I would say, that wherever you are in your grief, whether you have lost your husband, your brother, your sister, a friend, or maybe you haven't had that experience yet, but you've lost a job, or you're just mentally not in a space that you feel like you can get out of, that you're not strong enough, that we hear it a lot, but it is true that you're not alone. You're not alone. And that there are many ways that you can talk to people. How's the weather is one of the languages that I'd love for you to introduce to your community or your friend or your mother, or just listen to this podcast and listen to these girls about having gratitude with grief, and, a little bit about what we talked about, that, at the very beginning, when I lost Greg, I had this person say, give yourself grace. And we did talk about that earlier, but I think that's an important word. And we just really need to spread that more. I believe that grace is very hard to swallow when you don't even know what that means. And when you do know what grace is, it's just as hard to sit with it and give permission. But believe me, grace is what we have. And it allows us to not only heal, but to share with others what that means. And then to sit with others, to have patience enough to listen to their story.
Well, thank you so much, Erin. We will include in the summary more information about Erin's business and also any links to connect with her further. Erin, I look forward to us being longtime friends and part of this shared community. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Consider being a supporter of the show by downloading episodes, subscribing to the podcast, or clicking the support link in the show notes. You can also leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. If you would like to share your story, please message the Facebook or Instagram page. You can also email griefandgratitudepodcast@gmail.com. Tune in next Monday for an all-new episode. This podcast was created to honor the memory of Declan Shaw ONeil and Jennifer Lynn Berry.